Pokemon battle mechanics are complicated, but they're generally not ridiculous. Today, for this video, I've compiled a list of 12 ridiculous, unfair, and insane Pokemon battle mechanics that are no longer in the games, so we can look back on them with a nostalgic, whoa, what? Yikes! They're in no particular order, except I've saved the most ridiculous for last because it just fully broke everything. Many of these will be from Gen 1, but I'd like to start with a mechanic that persisted long past that. Explosion and self-destruct are infamous moves that instantly knock out the user, but do huge damage in exchange. Self-destruct's power is 200, and Explosion is just an upgrade with 250 power. This makes Explosion the strongest move in the game outside Infinity Power Oko moves. Then Self-destruct isn't far behind, only surpassed by a couple Z moves. Clearly, very strong moves, but they used to be far stronger. Because up until Generation 5, when calculating damage, these moves halved the target's defense. What? Why? In Gen 1, Self-Destruct was only 130 power and Explosion was only 170, but because of this defense halving, their effective powers were actually 260 and 340. But when they were buffed to their current powers in Gen 2, the defense halving effect remained, making them effectively 400 and 500 power. It's absolutely unhinged. Very few Pokemon could survive that. My best guess for why they did this is that they felt like, oh, nothing should survive, you know, a bomb, which I don't agree with, since I don't think any move should be this strong without a ton of setup or a very large chance to fail. But even if we're cool with the power, why not just make the displayed power of the moves 400 and 500? Why have this deceptive hidden mechanic that tricks people into thinking the moves are weaker than they are? It's not an issue anymore since, like I said, they fixed this in Gen 5, but when playing the games before that, just be wary of the bomb moves. Or load up on revives and exploit them. Another famous powerful normal type move is Hyper Beam. It's 150 power, but in exchange, the user must recharge and do nothing the next turn. Or do they? In Gen 1, a Pokemon could avoid the Hyper Beam recharge turn through a variety of ways, but most of them involved the Pokemon still not moving anyways. However, there were some ways the Pokemon could use Hyper Beam, then immediately move again. If Hyper Beam KO'd the enemy Pokemon or broke the enemy substitute, the user would not have to recharge. This is broken. This is the third strongest move in the Gen 1 games, ignoring the Oko moves, and many Pokemon learn it and thus get stabbed from it, boosting it to 225 power. Plus, since Gen 1 only had one fully evolved Ghost types and no Steel types, only Rock types resisted it. You could realistically win a battle by using Hyper Beam 6 turns in a row with no drawbacks. Pair that with the next mechanic and you have some of the most overpowered Pokemon of all time. And that is thanks to critical hits. Today, a critical hit makes the move do 50% more damage and ignore defense boosts of the target and attack drops of the user, outside the burn attack drop. The base chance is 1 in 24 now, but before Gen 6, it was 1 in 16. Also in Gens 2 through 5, the damage was higher, 2 times instead of 1.5 times. None of this applies in Gen 1. Mostly. First, the damage wasn't double, it doubled the user's level for calculating damage. Due to math I don't really think is necessary to get into, generally the higher level Pokemon, the more the damage multiplier. It ranges from about 1.5 times to 1.95 times. Also, all stat changes for both the user and the target are ignored, even the user's attack boosts. So it was technically possible for a critical hit to do less damage than a regular hit, if the attacker has had their attacks boosted, or if the target has had their defenses lowered. But I don't care about the damage right now. I care about the chance, which instead of being uniform across all Pokemon, depended on the base speed of the attacker. The math is a little tricky, but in the end, the slowest fully evolved Pokemon, like Snorlax or Slowbro, would only crit 5.86% of the time, which I should add is still a higher chance than today. Today's chance is only about 4.17%. But then the fastest Pokemon in the game, Electrode, crits 27.34% of the time. Over a quarter of its attacks were crits. But what Hyper Beam paired best with were the Pokemon that were not quite as fast as Electrode, but still very fast, and got the stab boost from the move. That being Persian and Tauros. Both crit around 21 to 22% of the time, and with Hyper Beam being a physical move they get stabbed from, you can critical hit, no recharge Hyper Beam your way to an easy victory. An unfair one, but a smooth one. Let's shift gears from attack-focused entries and talk about status conditions. Today, 5 types have straightforward status condition immunities. Poison and Steel-type Pokemon cannot be poisoned, Fire-type Pokemon cannot be burned, Ice-type Pokemon cannot be frozen, and Electric-type Pokemon cannot be paralyzed. The only exceptions to this are when that Pokemon's type changes, or if the Poison or Steel-type is poisoned by a Pokemon with the ability Corrosion. In the past, there were some small exceptions to this. In Gen 2 only, Tri-Attack could burn fire types and freeze ice types. Also in Gen 2 only, Twin Needle, a bug-type move, could poison steel types because it could actually damage them, unlike poison-type attacks. However, this entry is about a huge exception. Until Generation 6, Electric-type Pokemon were not immune to paralysis. In fact, they were only immune to it from damage-dealing Electric-type moves. Sounds specific, right? It is. This only protected Electric types from paralysis from moves like Thunderbolt, where they damage with a chance to paralyze. If the move is damaging but not Electric type, like Lick or Body Slam, paralysis could happen. If the move is Electric type but not damaging, like Thunder Wave, paralysis could happen. If the move is neither Electric type nor damaging, like Stun Spore or Glare, paralysis could happen. And if it's not a move at all, like the abilities Static, Affect Spore, or Synchronize, paralysis could happen. And you wanna know the meanest part? This only applied in Gen 1. From Gens 2 through 5, Electric type Pokemon can be paralyzed through any method. They had one measly, super specific immunity, and they didn't even get to keep that. And what's so insane to me is that they did this despite doing something completely different for Fire with Burn and Ice with Freeze. Ice, Electric, Fire is an established trio. Freeze, Paralysis, Burn. Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, and Flamethrower, which are identical moves except for type and status caused. Tri-Attack is famously these 3 types together. And in Gen 3, Fire and Ice became immune to their statuses from that specific move, yet you could still paralyze an Electric type with Tri-Attack until Gen 6. I will never understand why it took them so long to put Electric on the same playing field as Fire and Ice. It's really weird that it took them so many generations. Also, one more paralysis fact that I didn't think warranted a full entry, but I wanted to mention. In Gen 1, normal type Pokemon were immune to paralysis from Body Slam, which meant in Gen 1, you could paralyze an Electric type with Body Slam, but not a normal type. This next status-related weird mechanic was thankfully killed after Gen 1, and it had to do with Freeze. Freeze is infamous for having no predefined endpoint like Sleep does, despite also preventing the Pokemon from moving. The frozen Pokemon simply has a 20% chance to thaw every time it moves, including the same turn it was frozen if it moves second, so you can thaw instantly. This thaw chance was only 10% in Gen 2, and in Gen 1 it was 0. I'm not kidding. In Gen 1, if your Pokemon was frozen, it would be frozen for the rest of the battle unless one of 3 things happened. Number 1, you use an item that cures it, like a full restore. Number 2, the frozen Pokemon uses rest, replacing its freeze with sleep. And number 3, the Pokemon is struck by a fire-type move that can burn, which in Gen 1 was all of them but Fire Spin. Since then, thawing has expanded to include being hit by any damaging fire-type move, plus the burning moves that are not fire-type. Additionally, a frozen Pokemon can thaw itself by using those 4 moves, plus this specific list of fire-type moves. But that's it. I do not know why it is only those specific fire moves and not just like all of the damaging ones. Like, what's the difference between being hit by Flamethrower and using it? Like, the fire's right there. But self-thawing didn't happen until Gen 2. So in Gen 1, if you lacked the right healing item, you didn't know rest, and you're not fighting a Pokemon that knows a fire move, which is unlikely, considering, you know, it froze you in the first place, your Pokemon has effectively fainted, even if the Ice Beam did almost no damage. This is somewhat countered by the fact that freeze is a lot harder to cause than the other status conditions. It's only from moves and only with a max 10% chance, but even then, this was busted. Another Gen 1 mechanic that completely stopped your Pokemon was the binding moves. Bind, Wrap, Whirlpool, Fire Spin, and Clamp. Today, these moves do a bit of damage for a few turns and prevent the bound Pokemon from switching out, unless they're a ghost type. This is not how it worked in Gen 1. Back then, neither the bound Pokemon or the attacking Pokemon can move at all. The target doesn't get to do anything, while for the user it says the attack continues. So both Pokemon are just stuck sitting there for 2 to 5 turns, waiting for the move to finish. Yeah, potentially 5 turns of both Pokemon just waiting. Additionally, all the subsequent hits do the same as the first. So if you crit on the first hit, all of the other hits will also be crit damage. These moves suck so bad to fight against because if the enemy Pokemon is faster, they can use the binding move, stopping your move that turn. Then when you're finally free, they just use it again, and you're trapped again. They are genuinely hell, and thank God Gen 2 made it so your Pokemon can at least still do something while they're being bound. I'll never forget my first playthrough of Yellow in the Virtual Console. There is a Bellsprout that haunts my dreams. It is hell to deal with these moves, and thank God they changed it immediately in Gen 2. Another Gen 1 damage stacking strategy doesn't stop movement, but its damage output is much higher. First, it involves Toxic. This move badly poisons the target, which is different from regular poison because the damage done each turn increases as time goes on. Next is Leech Seed, which triggers seeding on the target. The seeded Pokemon is damaged each turn, and the opposing Pokemon is healed by the amount of damage done. Today, both regular Poison and Leech Seed deal 1/8 max HP each turn, but it was 1/16 in Gen 1. Bad Poison starts at 1/16 HP, increasing by 1/16 each turn, maxing out at 15/16. But this is not how it worked in Gen 1. Back then, it was a lot meaner. Because the toxic damage increase wasn't triggered by a turn passing, it was triggered by the Pokemon taking damage from toxic, which sounds like it would be the same. However, that hidden counter was also increased by the Pokemon taking Leech Seed damage. This counter is not in play if only Leech Seed is applied, but since they use the same damage algorithm for whatever reason, if both Toxic and Leech Seed are applied, each instance of damage ticks the counter up. So if you Toxic a Pokemon, it takes 1/16 damage first. But then if you Leech Seed it, it will then take 2/16 from Toxic, then 3/16 from Leech Seed in the same turn. Then the next turn, 4/16 from Toxic, 5/16 from Leech Seed, and so on and so on. Both will cap at 15/16 damage, but you're not gonna get that far. By turn 5, one of them's doing 8 and the other one's doing 9, and that's 17/16 in one turn. If you can't heal, it's impossible to survive. Gen 2 promptly removed Toxic's interaction with other kinds of recurring damage. And thank God, because if you had a Toxic Leech Seed Pokemon that was bulky enough, you can't lose if you're not fighting a grass or poison type that's immune to one or the other. Because as the Leech Seed damage increases, so does your healing. It's so busted. Like everything in Gen 1, that game is held together by masking tape and chewing gum. This next entry is also about Toxic, but weirdly enough, it's actually something that did not start until Gen 6, which makes it the most recent mechanic in this video. Beginning in Gen 6, Poison-type Pokemon were buffed so that when they use Toxic, it cannot ever miss, even if the target is in the middle of digging or flying. However, this accuracy bypassing effect lasts for the Pokemon's entire turn. So if they use another move in the same turn, that move will also never miss. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could a Pokemon possibly use 2 moves in the same turn? Well, there are a few very specific ways. First, the ability Magic Bounce, which deflects status moves back onto the Pokemon that used them. technically causes the Pokemon to use the move they're bouncing back. But no magic bounce Pokemon are poison type, so you'd have to do some type changing shenanigans to make this work. Dancer is another ability that causes the Pokemon to use the move the opponent just did, but again, no poison types. The easiest way to make this happen is by using Instruct, Orangaru's signature move, which makes the target use the same move it most recently did. So turn 1, Orangaru does whatever, and the poison type uses Toxic, succeed or fail. The next turn, Orangaru uses Instruct on the poison type, making it use Toxic again. And then in that same turn, the poison type uses the move it just clicked, such as Horn Drill, which thus cannot miss unless the target is immune to it. This could happen in Gen 6, Gen 7, and a little bit of Gen 8. It was in Sword and Shield, but then they patched it about a year after the game's release. And if that makes you say, oh, hey, wait, then that's a glitch. You shouldn't be talking about glitches, only intentional decisions. My response to you would be, no, please be wrong. If I can't talk about glitches, I can't talk about like most of Gen 1, and then I would not have a video. This next entry has to do with one of the most unhinged choices the developers ever made. It led to a bad, non-legendary Pokemon being banned in the official competitive circuit. This is about Chatot and Chatter. Chatter is Chatot's signature move, a flying type special move that used to be 60 power, now 65. But it also had a chance to confuse based on how loud you yell. This sounds like a joke, and it's not. In the Gen 4 games, Chatter could be used outside of battle, and it would allow you to record a voice line into the DS's microphone. This audio file would then play instead of Chatot's normal cry, since Chatot is a parrot mimicking sounds. Subscribe! With no audio recording, Chatter would confuse only 1% of the time. With a quiet recording, the chance is still 1%, but then medium volume is 11%, and loud volume is 31%. It's already insane that how loud you screamed into a DS microphone could affect how good a move was, but it gets even more insane when you take a step back and realize, oh, people can yell whatever they want. Which, as you might imagine, opens the door for people making a Pokemon say some things that Big Pikachu doesn't want playing as audio in their games. Such as, bring back the National Dex, Typhlosion is innocent, Flannery's hot, pain. No, we can't put that in there. This is why Chatot was banned for multiple years in the official competitive circuit, along with online matchmaking in Gen 5. Gen 4 didn't have random online matchmaking, so you could only battle through Wi-Fi if you like already knew the person, so you couldn't say stuff to strangers. Clearly they realized this huge error, and in Gen 6, Chatter was changed to not involve voice recordings at all, and instead, always confuse? Whoa, that is an insane buff. This makes Chatter the only damaging move that is both 100% accurate and guaranteed to confuse, outside a couple G-Max moves. However, Chatot isn't very good, and Smeargle cannot sketch Chatter, so it hasn't actually really mattered that much. Also, Confusion got nerfed in Gen 7 to only self-hit a third of the time instead of half the time. And then since the start of Gen 8, Chatot has only been in BDSP, which people don't use to battle other people, and Legends Arceus, which didn't have the move at all. So Chatter really hasn't actually ended up being that broken long-term, but the focus of this entry is that in the past, you could make a Pokemon attack better by screaming obscenities. Let's do one more later gen entry before I do the last two Gen 1 entries, which both of them are by far the most unhinged of the video, especially the last one. This mechanic comes from Gen 3, where they introduced double battles and screwed it up. Today in double battles, the 4 Pokemon have a chance to go, then the turn ends. If during that turn, any of them faint before any of the others have finished moving, attacks aimed at the fainted Pokemon will instead target its partner. If no Pokemon are left standing on one side, but the other still has an attack to try, a message like, "but there was no target," plays. The turn ends, and the trainer whose Pokemon fainted can now send out more. But in Gen 3, the no target message didn't exist. There's always a target. Capitalism never ceases. If a Pokemon is KO'd, you must immediately send in another. And if the other side still has an attack left, it has to immediately take those hits. Thanks to moves that hit both opponents like Surf, Gen 3 double battles can potentially see one side lose 4 Pokemon in one turn. This is deeply unfair and a big reason why Coliseum and XD, the spin-off games where every battle is a double battle, are so freaking difficult. Thankfully, they fixed this in the immediately following generation, but oof, man, some double battles like Tate and Liza and Emerald, it can feel real bad to have a Pokemon go down and then have another one immediately just get hammered. Now it is time for the first of the final 2 entries, the most insane stuff in Gen 1. The first of the 2 is Haze. That's it. Like it's just Haze. Today, Haze is a simple status move that removes all stat changes from all Pokemon on the field, negative or positive. Simple and easy to understand. In Gen 1 though, you know what? Let me just read you its description from Bulbapedia. Haze resets the stat stages of both active Pokemon to 0. Okay, same as now. And removes the stat reductions due to burns and paralysis. Oh, but not the statuses themselves? It also lists the effects of Focus Energy and Dire Hit, Mist and Guard Special, X Accuracy, Leash Seed, Disable, Reflect, and Light Screen from both sides of the field. Wait. Hold on, so it's Defog, but on steroids because this removes more than Defog does? But also, it's Defog, but you're creating fog? Additionally, Haze cures confusion and turns bad poison into regular poison for both active Pokemon, and also removes any non-volatile status condition from the opponent. What? It was already crazy, but now it's doing all this stuff too? Like, this list is a mile long. It's turning bad poison into regular poison. It's curing status conditions, but only the opponent, not even the Pokemon that used Haze. This move does everything badly. But then there's one more Haze related thing that interacts with mechanics I've already discussed: Hyper Beam and Freeze. If a frozen Pokemon that has not recharged from Hyper Beam has its freeze status eliminated via Haze. To clarify, a Pokemon uses Hyper Beam, then it gets frozen before it can do the recharge turn, but then also that freeze is then removed by Haze, still before the recharge. It will remain unable to attack, switch, or do anything else, and nothing will then be able to change this until it faints. The Pokemon is made to be permanently helpless within that battle. You can do nothing but sit there and wait for it to end. It's niche, it's a very specific situation, but like, overall, just don't use Haze in Gen 1. It's a horrifying mess. And finally, the most ridiculous battle mechanic, stat changes in Gen 1. That may sound broad, because it is. It was all broken. This central game mechanic was complete and utter chaos. First, I have to explain badge stat boosts. In the first 3 generations, earning gym badges would provide all of your Pokemon with a permanent stat boost for internal battles. In Gens 1 and 2, it was 12.5%, then 10% in Gen 3. Kind of a ridiculous mechanic, in my opinion. Feels kind of overpowered. I mean, maybe that's why the League Pokemon were so high level, but like, regardless, I'm overall glad it's gone. Especially since it fully broke Gen 1. Anytime the player's Pokemon was impacted by a stat-affecting move, whether boosted or lowered, whether the player or opponent Pokemon used the move, the badge boosts are applied to all the non-modified stats again. To be clear, you use Harden to boost your defense, your Pokemon's attack, special, and speed would all instantly receive a 12.5% boost on top of the badge boost that they already have. This is because the boost was supposed to be used just on the modified stat when calculating what it is after the new stat modifier. But they had that multiplier go to all of the stats, and its only cap was when the stat reached 999. If you have all the badges, spamming Harden with a level 5 Metapod can eventually let it outspeed or maybe even one-shot significantly stronger Pokemon. Apparently, like Gen 1 speedrunners will say things like, oh, let me just Harden a few times so I can outspeed. This gives a whole new meaning to, oh, you don't have enough badges to train me? Huh. Oh wait, you do? Oh my God, I respect you so much. I'm gonna become a horrifying embodiment of compounding interest. And this isn't even the only issue. When a Pokemon successfully uses a stat modifying move, whether on itself or the enemy, if the other Pokemon is burned or paralyzed, the stat drops from those conditions, having attack for burn or quartering speed for paralysis, are applied again. So if you sit there spamming growth against a burned or paralyzed opponent, not only are you badge boosting your way to being stupidly overpowered, but you're also decimating the enemy Pokemon's attack or speed, at least until you get them down to a value of literally 1. Total anarchy. Gen 1 was already like this, but the fact that this applies with every stat modifying move in the game is just like, it just truly demonstrates if you want to play Kanto, maybe play one of the newer games. Unless, of course, you crave that chaos. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to watch another video diving into Pokemon's past, dive into your own Pokemon past by checking out 12 dumb mistakes you made in Pokemon.